Everyone needs a little hero. My Fwiend, Hewo. Hewo had sprinted back from Sam's room that day, an odd mixture of feelings making his head swirl. He technically had been seen twice now, and had even talked to Sam outright, promising to come back. It went against everything he was taught to do, but in some ways it went against everything he had been told about humans. Not all of them were bloodthirsty beings set on capturing and keeping borrowers. Hewo counted his lucky stars that both of the humans he encountered seemed to be the nice kind that he hoped existed. There was the nagging sickness, however, that sat just above his diaphragm. What if they told someone? What if the old lady forgot and started asking the daughter questions about where the tiny person went? What if the boy wants me to come back just so he can tell anyway? Hewo shook his head and clapped his hands on his cheeks. He had to calm himself down before entering his home. Since it was midday, his family was out working on inventorying and helping a new family move into one of the lower floors. A part wanted to go and help the new family and make an appearance, but the encounter left him shaking and rattled. Instead, he decided to clean their home, specifically his room. He used a bundle of feathers as a broom and swept all of their floors and used a fragment of rag for dusting. He made sure the leftover doll dishes were washed and even spent time making some new utensils out of their tinfoil collection. Maybe the new family would need some things to get started. Hewo listened at dinner, contributing when he could to the conversation. The new family was invited up and consisted of two very talkative girls around the same age as Hewo's oldest brother, Atlas, and it was clear Atlas was interested in talking to them a lot. He offered to show them the place and some of the safer places to borrow, to which the girls agreed. "Thanks again for helping us find a decent place. We were going to a different spot, but 2 hours there was way too long," said the one with slightly red-orange hair and freckles. She took a drink from one of the cups made from a pin cap. "Oh, why's that?" asked Callie. This time, the other one answered, who had smaller, pointed features and glasses on her eyes. "Well, they must have just moved in too, but it sounded like a small child was crying, and that's not really the best when it comes to moving in. I'm sure there are a lot of borrowings, but..." "It's not worth the chance," finished the redhead. This piqued Hewo's interest. A kid crying? Was it because they were lonely? He wondered silently why the child was crying and how old they might be. Surely they couldn't be older than Sam, the boy he encountered earlier that day. The curious Hewo in the making offered to help them bring back some of the supplies his parents gifted to get them started. His true motive being to get a better look at the crying child. He and his brothers, Atlas and Tyron, escorted the two girls, Iris and Riel, back to their place. They insisted they could manage, but Atlas made some sorry excuse so he could talk to them longer, and Tyron wanted to go see one of his friends on the lower level. Hewo hoped he wouldn't be asked why he wanted to tag along, so he could slip by the walls of the newcomer's apartment. It was easy enough to do. While Atlas talked and Tyron made his way through the halls, Hewo slipped into the hallway and walked along the well-dusted beams by the electrical cords until he reached one of the outlets. He stepped up to the edge, hearing the faint hum of electricity from the cords inside them, and strained his ears to listen beyond the walls. Nothing at the moment. Did he dare go out now? Hewo thought about where he was in the apartment. His mental map of the area confirmed that this place used to be vacant, so knowing the schedule enough to step out was a fool's errand. Instead, the borrower shimmied up one of the lines up to the ceiling tiles, running along the edges of the support beams, until he reached an observation place near one of the loose pieces of trim. He hoped, as he ran, that Atlas wouldn't go looking for him immediately. Hewo knelt down, unhitched the latch, and let it slide a few centimeters so he could look down. The area looked newly moved into. There were still stacked boxes, like in the old woman's apartment, but these had things piling out of them and weren't sealed like hers. There was a light on in the main living area and dishes on the table. he also noticed a woman sitting slightly slumped on the couch. It took a moment to catch a glimpse of a tussle of light brown blonde hair and a head resting on the woman's shoulder. This must be the kid. Hewo could see the kid was a little girl, and she had her thumb in her mouth as she slept on who Hewo suspected was the mother. Overall, they looked peaceful. Hewo couldn't help but think about his youngest sister, Winnie, and how his mom held her when she was having a hard time with her teeth. Is that what's going on? No, she looks older. It wasn't much to go on, but Hewo had his next mission in sight. Hopefully, this one he wouldn't have to be seen to make a difference. The next day, Hewo gathered up his hook, line, razor, and all of his other essentials into his bag. The nagging fear of Sam letting it slip that he knew about Hewo tugged at him, and he would have to face him and go back. For now, however, Hewo needed to see what this new family was like. He made his way through the passages, greeting some of the other borrowers as he went, before grabbing the line and belaying back to the ceiling where he was the night before. The latch for the trim at the observation space was still secure, but Hewo could smell fresh paint wafting through the crevices. That wasn't a good sign. He laid his hand on his pin and approached with caution. No glue traps, no fingerprints in paint, no tampering of the line. Even with all of these things, he didn't trust it. His father, Casper, and his mother, Prim, had warned that humans notice when something they've done recently is undone. Paint was one of those things. If there was a line where there wasn't one before, the new occupants might pull the trim up and notice their place. So, Hewo elected to go to a different room. He walked the halls, having to jump from one beam to another because of some rogue pipes, and rounded the next corner, which is when he heard it. Crying. It was quiet, but unmistakable, and just loud enough to make a pit form in his middle. The young borrower crouched near the ceiling fan outlet, the other observation post, and peered down into the room. Below, he could see a small bookshelf and a bed just barely a foot off of the ground, perfect for a small child. Boxes, big and small, littered the ground, and, thankfully, the room hadn't yet been painted. Then, just beside the bed with her back to the bookshelf, Hewo spotted the little girl from the night before. She was sitting and clutching a baby doll to her chest, whimpering and crying quietly to herself. She was wearing a pretty little dress with sunflowers on it, and her hair was in pigtails that were on the top of her head. Also, from what Hewo could tell, there was a massive red stain down the front of the dress. Where the mother was, he didn't know. What he did know was this would not stand. But what could he do? The little girl was obviously upset and probably needed comfort. A deadly thought crossed his mind. How quick is she? If I went down there, would she make a grab for me? Little kids like grabbing things. At least Winnie does. Hewo watched the girl wipe her nose with the back of her hand, but also noticed the tissue box on top of the bookshelf. There. That's something I can do. Hewo jogged round to the nearest wall joist and belayed down the next line to reach the floor. The descent was as quick as Hewo's heart rate. I'm just going out there for a second. I'll climb the bookshelf and get her a tissue. It'll be all right. There was an outlet not far away, and he had to force it open, but soon enough he was running silently along the baseboard toward the bookshelf. The little girl, sitting nearby sniffling, didn't notice Hewo swing his hook or that he was climbing only a few feet from her head. From above, she didn't seem that big. However, being next to her was another matter entirely. Hewo's instincts screamed in protest for him to run backwards, the internal debate of what he was doing raging in his mind as he, hand over fist, climbed to the top. Slightly out of breath, the aspiring Hewo took a moment to make sure the mother wasn't going to burst through the door when he was in mid-action. Nothing. It took a few tries, but he managed to pull himself up onto the top of the box and began wrangling the tissue free. It was always easier with someone pulling the other end of the tissue at the same time, but there was no one to help here. It took a good deal of heaving, but Hewo finally managed to pull it free. A quick peek over the edge revealed the top of the little girl's head. Perfect. Hewo pulled his prize to the side and draped it over until it gracefully drifted down to the ground like an autumn leaf. He listened as there was a single, distinct sniffle and the slight sound of surprise. There was the rustling of the girl's chubby fingers grasping onto the tissue paper, and the crinkling that followed seemed to Hewo that she was using it. What Hewo expected was that she would feel better and perhaps continue playing with her doll. What he didn't anticipate was the little girl getting curious and letting that override her tears. Hewo had backed away from the edge toward his line, feeling pleased with himself, when a shadow appeared behind him. Just like before, he felt every hair stand on end and every nerve scream to flee as he suddenly saw two glossy golden eyes peering directly at eye level with him. Instead of staring curiously or asking him questions, the little girl let out a high-pitched whine and began backing up with more tears than ever filling her eyes. She hugged the doll closer to her chest and took a few steps backwards. This was unexpected, to say the least. What is she doing? She's crying harder. Is she scared of me? That simply would not do. Hewo wasn't happy about being seen yet again by a child, but he couldn't stand the thought of such a sweet-looking child being upset because of him. Fighting his instincts to run, he instead smiled and took one hesitant step forward. Hey, it's okay, he said soothingly, eyes darting to the door to make sure the mother didn't come into the room without him knowing about it. Don't cry. I mean, it's okay to cry if you're upset. It's okay. You're okay. I'm not going to hurt you. The little girl sniffed, her brow furrowing in confusion as she pressed her face into the cloth baby doll in her arms. Should I keep talking? What do I do? Hewo felt his heart pounding in his chest, racking every rib in his body. I saw you were upset and wanted to try and make you feel better. I didn't mean to scare you. The notion of Hewo scaring someone like a human was absolutely ludicrous, but it was the only thing Hewo could think of at the moment to apologize for. The statement also seemed to confuse the little girl, but at the very least she stopped crying for the present. Every third breath or so was a hiccup, a sniffle, or some combination of the two. But after a minute or so, tears were no longer streaming down her slightly pudgy cheeks or her glossy golden eyes. She wasn't saying anything, but Hewo definitely seemed to have her attention now. The borrower's thoughts were racing, grasping at anything to keep his head from swirling out of control. His family prided themselves in not being seen, captured, or breaking rules, ever. What if they found out? What would happen to them? He couldn't think about that right now. Right now, he needed to focus on earning this little girl's trust, and hope she wouldn't tell her mom. My name is Hewo. What's your name? It wasn't a very strong introduction, but it was the only thing he could think of to say next. The little girl eyed him for a moment longer before muttering something that was muffled by the doll she was pressing into her face. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Maggie?
Said the little girl bashfully, her mouth barely peeking out from behind the doll. Maggie? Repeated Hewo. That's a wonderful name. Well, Maggie, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for scaring you. I didn't mean it. Maggie again looked confused, but this time responded with a small headshake.
You didn't scare me,
she muttered, sniffling pitifully afterwards. Hewo didn't know if he was just hearing things, but something didn't quite sound the same. Oh, I see. Good to know, he said with a smile, now letting his nerves drive his curiosity. Well, if you don't mind my asking, why were you crying? Maggie sniffed 3 times in rapid succession.
Well, the girls on the playground were very nice. They...
Maggie's eyes were beginning to fill with tears again. It's okay, Maggie. Just... Hewo began breathing deeply in and out, exaggerating the shoulder movement so she could see him breathing deeply. Seemingly, she understood and latched onto Hewo's words to copy his motion.
I wanted to play too, but they made fun of how I speak, and they poured the juice down my dress.
Maggie's eyes were filling again with tears, and so were Hero's eyes. How could they do something like that? How cruel. Well, Maggie, I like the way you talk, said Hero. Maggie sniffed a few more times.
Really?
She asked, her sweet little voice carrying like a spring breeze. Hero nodded and smiled. Really, he affirmed. Maggie let the smallest smile curl across her face as she continued to stare at Hero. Then, like clockwork, there was a shuffle in the other room which pulled at Hero's attention. Hero wasn't sure who it was, but he needed to make sure Maggie was the only one who knew about him. The borrower was snapped from his thoughts when Maggie spoke again.
Are you a toy like in the movies, or are you real?
Maggie had taken a step forward and was reaching a small, pudgy-fingered hand toward him. Hero's heart leapt into his throat as he gasped involuntarily. Yes, sputtered Hero, taking a few steps backwards as Maggie advanced another step. I mean, kind of. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw one of the toys with the blue-haired happy girl from the kids' show. I'm like an imaginary friend. Hero didn't want to lie or fib to the child, but he couldn't think of anything else that might keep her from grabbing him. Maggie's eyes looked a little confused, but she stopped advancing.
Imaginary friend?
Asked Maggie. Kind of like an imaginary friend. You see, I come here and there from time to time, replied Hero, trying to make his fib seem less severe. It didn't make him feel any better, but it seemed to make sense to Maggie at the very least.
So, you're my friend?
Asked Maggie. The aspiring Hero couldn't help but smile from ear to ear at the human girl's question. Of course, he smiled. If you'll have me, I will be your friend. The warm, youthful smile from Maggie was all the reward Hero needed. He glanced over at the doorway, hearing the shuffle again. Then the voice of a young man called out, Maggie, you okay? The voice came from another part of the apartment.
I'm okay. I'm just talking to my friend Hero. He's imaginary.
The fluidity of Maggie's statement was flawless and played perfectly to Hero's intention. Okay, well, tell Hero you'll be right back after you have a snack and get a new change of clothes on. Hero breathed a sigh of relief, slightly unnerved at hearing a human call out his name. As he backed up toward the embedded hook, Maggie, however, took note of this as well.
Are you leaving, Hero?
Asked Maggie. Hero hesitated, not sure how to answer the question. Well, yes, just for now, but I'll be back, okay? I mean, you're going to get a snack and everything. That's going to be fun, right? Asked Hero. Maggie looked a little unsure, but eventually nodded. It was heartbreaking, but Hero had other obligations to attend to. He still needed to go see Sam. Tell you what, offered Hero. Why don't I come and see you tomorrow? This once again brought a thoughtful, sweet smile onto Maggie's face. She nodded vigorously, her pigtails bouncing like golden brown wheat stalks.
Okay, see you then. Thank you, Hero.
Maggie took up her doll and left the room while Hero carefully descended the line slowly. His palms were sweating, and his heart was aching from how hard and how fast it had been beating during that entire exchange. As he made his way back to the hiding place in the wall by the baseboard, he couldn't help but feel sad. He realized that borrowers were always under potential threat of humans. It was a given fact. Hero had never really stopped to consider that humans were just as much of a threat to each other as they were for borrowers.